This podcast is created for farmers and powered by Pioneer Agronomy to bring you agronomic insights and proven solutions to fuel forward-thinking farming.
Hello and welcome to the Pioneer Agronomy Podcast. I'm agronomist Brian Schrader from the eastern side of the state of Indiana, joined as always by my co-host Ben Jacob from southern Indiana. Good morning, Ben.
Good morning, Brian. How are you today?
Pretty good. So, Ben, I guess, honestly, as we record this for distribution on April the 23rd, in both of our geographies, we've had a little activity. We've had some folks be able to get into the field to do some things, corn planting, soybean planting, spraying, anhydrous ammonia going on in a lot of places. I'd be curious, what is activity look like in your part of the world?
Yeah, you pretty well nailed it there. I would say probably midweek last week, some areas started to open up. I think to the south of me, they were able to go a little harder, and you've really got a mixed bag in the field down here. We have some of what you mentioned. A lot of gas went on last week. A lot of burn down went down, and some guys hit it pretty hard, planted a bunch of beans, maybe a little bit of corn, and then other places didn't see much activity at all. So a little bit all over the board. I would say that in a lot of the places where guys were able to run, personally, I was a little surprised at how well some of this ground worked up after all the water we've had on it here recently. Now, that's also an observation from the highway for the most part. And you know how that goes. So I suspect that even those that looked like they were working up pretty nice, maybe they were 95% fit. You're always going to have your wet holes and some tough spots. But, if you looked at the calendar and decided it's April 15th, I need to go, then you probably went last week. But, a little bit of a mixed bag all over the place. And there's a lot of green and purple fields still that maybe should have been addressed, but we can talk a little bit more about that. What's been going on up your way?
Yeah, well, I summarized all the activity around. I've got two parts of my geography for listeners that maybe don't remember. I work basically on the east side of I-69 from about Markle, Indiana, down to just south of Winchester. And so had some areas in the Bluffton, Indiana area, the Winchester, Indiana area, and then just to the north and west of Muncie working. So the Gaston and Matthews area, those are the typical areas that get in first. And so all of those activities that I mentioned at the lead off of the podcast were going on last week. But to your point, a lot of weedy fields. A lot of fields that are much dirtier. They came on last week. Once we got some moisture there a week ago, everything really started to green up. And so we've got a lot of fields that folks are going to need to get something going on. I'm with you. I was a little surprised driving around, and as you mentioned from the highway, those observations, I was a little surprised at how well things were looking as they were going in. Now there's a lot of corn stalk fields where if you get out and you pull the corn stalks back, it was pretty gooey still underneath those corn stalks. But in a lot of the cases where these guys were running, it was pretty good. I mean, 95% fit is probably a good number to assign to a lot of those. But those areas that I mentioned are typically the ones that dry out. A lot of good tile drainage that's been done in those areas as well. So that obviously helps get guys in a little bit quicker in a lot of those areas. Some of those soils are pretty well drained naturally as well. So the combination of the two make them the early starters, if you will.
Right. Of course. Yeah. The amount of water that this ground has taken, and some of it goes back to the way that it came. I guess if you get 3 or 4 inches coming pretty quick, it's going to shed a lot of it, as no flatter than we are down here. So it shouldn't surprise me. Now I will say that activity was pretty short lived. We maybe had Wednesday through Friday evening, and then we went back to getting some rain. And so I look across the area that I covered, and it just seems to be the pattern anymore, where rain is so inconsistent. Right at my house, we had about 1 3/4 inches, and some other spots in my area had barely an inch, and others had almost 3 inches out of
Okay.
this. So, the line of storms that track right along I-70 more or less. So I don't think, knowing the fields that got planted are all obviously the driest fields. I would imagine that there was not enough water to hurt any of that. I think that they'll dry out pretty quickly, and that's water coming over 3 days. Not
Yeah.
not all at once. So I think the stuff that did get planted, we had good heat over the weekend, and I think that it'll probably be in pretty good shape here. Although, who knows what the forecast is, who knows how accurate the forecast is, but it
Yes.
looks like we're going to circle back around towards the end of this week and be wet again. So we'll see how that
Yeah.
goes.
Yeah. Rain totals up here. The agronomists on the eastern side of the state of Indiana, we kind of all check in on Monday mornings and give a status update. And so, on the east side of the state, rain kind of, I guess, varied. It certainly was not as much as what the forecast was going to be. I personally, at my house, had 0.8 of an inch of rain. My geography was kind of scattered in that 3/4 of an inch to 0.8 or so, but on the eastern side of the state, it varied, from just a couple tenths all the way up. I think I was probably the heavy spot. That band that you talked about on 70 kind of trickled on across Indianapolis and went on to the northeast and did catch some of my geography. So 0.8, probably close to an inch in a couple spots where they had, individual downpours, but got some areas in that southeastern portion. They'll probably be back in by Tuesday or Wednesday because they only got just a couple tenths. So we're going to make some progress again this week, probably just in time for it to rain again on Friday.
Yeah, it might be worth mentioning here as we're kind of trying to paint the picture for the entire state is that band of rain was pretty narrow north and south. And
Yep.
so if you get down around Vincennes to Evansville, well under an inch, maybe half an inch in places, and out of all that. And I think that a lot of those guys will expect to be back in today or like Monday the
Yep.
21st today, not today when this comes out, or
Right.
even tomorrow. So they'll, with the forecast we currently have, they could have a pretty big week down that way.
Right. Yeah. And I think Carl will probably have a pretty good week too. I can't speak for him, but looking at the precipitation map, it looks like that a lot of that geography north of Lafayette got kind of on the light end as well, even though there did look like there were some pretty good storm fronts that went through. But when you look at the accumulation map, it looks like those folks, at least from that map, they'll probably be back in, especially with all of those coarse textured soils that they've got up there. They, dry out pretty quick because of all that sand.
Yeah, people find it shocking sometimes, but when longtime listeners will know that I spent the first half of my career working in research in Tipton County, and we managed plots basically from south of Indy to almost to Michigan, right? And so you think about getting down around like Monrovia or in Shelby, Johnson County down there, you would think if that's the southern extent of your testing network, that's where you would start at. And
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, we always started up north of Lafayette, and on some of those sandy soils, closer to Valparaiso in some cases, the farthest
Yeah.
north extent. And there were some. We've talked quite a bit over the years, how strong our corn vigor is overall.
Mm-hmm.
And I back when we rode on the planters, I can tell you that I spent some frigid days up in that
Yes.
area planting plots into the sand that I'm sure was the same temperature as the air. And I think that not to confuse anybody, we do explicitly test for germination and vigor and develop that, but I think it's also a byproduct of some of our testing environments that those products are going to stand out when they come up into 45-degree weather and get sandblasted for a month before they really get to take off.
Well, I always think about when you talk about conversations about those coarser textured soils and the temperature when you're planting. I spent a good chunk of my early career over in Ohio and worked that area just south of kind of the lower portion of Lake Erie. And there's some black sands over there that are unbelievably productive, but it's really interesting. I've always found it I won't say curious, but interesting for sure that in a lot of cases early in the season, this time of year, the soil temperature will track pretty close to the lake temperature. And so to your point, I've planted some plots in that part of the world where it is cold when you're planting, and soil temperature, because they're so coarse, comes up pretty fast once you get some heat going. But I've spent a little time planting some plots in some pretty cold environments. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So, yep. Well, Ben, you mentioned the long-term forecast, 8 to 14 day, is kind of what we're looking at. You mentioned it looks like maybe some rain. What are we hearing from National Weather Service in your part of the world for the next 8 to 14 days with the forecast that they're giving you guys?
Yeah, so it looks like we're going to have pretty good heat accumulation. And it looks like we're going to be potentially a little wetter than normal. And you're looking that far out, that's still pretty vague. I think that I think there's my opinion as not a meteorologist and probably not even a weather nerd is that we're probably going to stick to a similar pattern where we're going to have a handful of dry days, then a day or two of moisture, which is, a typical spring. I think the thing that I would call out, I know it's starting to feel late for a lot of guys, but really it's not. And you know, we go through this every spring where we've not progressed as much as we want to, and with the equipment that we have, we can cover a lot of ground in a hurry. And I'm really drawn back to it's tempting to say 2019, but that was even more of a mess. But 2018 is a year that really stands out to me to characterize just that fact, and that I don't think there might have been something, but almost nothing in the state of Indiana was planted before April 27th. That's when
Right.
things really took off, and by May 10th,
Yep.
everything was done, or
Done.
98%. So I know that it feels late. I just in these situations where we start to feel late and we're getting narrow windows, I would just encourage everybody to exercise caution, and make sure that it's truly fit, or fit enough that we're comfortable with it. We're always going to have those spots that I mentioned earlier
Yeah.
down here that are a little slower to get fit, and we
Sure.
may have to deal with those. But I again, we say it every spring, but the 100 days after you plant that seed is a lot more important than anything that's happened before that. So let's make sure we get it off to a good start. I mean, what's a it's pretty similar take up there, right? I mean, these
Yeah,
modeling
it's
broad areas.
Yeah, those are big. They do those 8 to 14 day, or I guess 6 to 10 and the 8 to 14 day. They give you probabilities. It's not necessarily a forecast per se. They give you a probability of the likelihood that you're going to be above normal or normal on temperature and precipitation. The maps are so general, and if you look at the lines, it looks like, at least from my view this morning, that you and I are in a pretty similar bucket in terms of what they're prescribing for us as well, or forecasting. One thing I do want to circle back around to, Ben, you're right. A lot of guys are starting to feel like they're behind already. And one of the things that I would remind everybody, at least in my geography, we've had a pretty big switch to late season corn over the last couple of years. So we're planting a lot more 113, 14, 15, 17 day CRM products. We're a long way from needing to pull any lever on making a hybrid switch. But I know for a lot of guys who maybe this is their first or second go around with some of those later season hybrids, they're, maybe feeling a little bit of a pinch. We're a long way from needing to do anything. If we get to the latter part of May, that may be a time to make some shifts potentially. But even then, as you've mentioned with our testing in our corn, I feel incredibly confident in planting late season corn well into the planting season, even into June, honestly. So I know there'll be some guys probably this week, especially if we get rain at the tail end of the week, that may start thinking that way. But I would caution that kind of conversation.
Yeah, my standing order on looking at hybrid maturities is that the plan is the plan for a reason, right? Most
Yep.
of us have put a lot of thought into this. Spent a lot of time considering what we want on the farm and where we want to place it. And once we get through Memorial Day, maybe we can have a conversation then. But I wholeheartedly agree. If we made the plan and selected these products for a reason, let's stick with them for the same
Yep.
reason.
Yeah.
Understanding completely that there are some logistical concerns on the back end, dryer capacity or dryer availability,
Yeah,
and
sure.
everything. But still, yeah, we're nowhere near that just yet. So,
Yeah.
but looking forward, I mean, we talked a little bit. The weather's kind of up in the air. One thing that we feel pretty confident, I think both of us, is that there will be more moisture here over the next 7 to 14 days. And not all, so we're not going to have all those days that are fit for field work. So
Yeah.
as you're looking forward, Brian, to getting back into the field, kind of what are you prioritizing for workload?
Yeah, my two big ones are number one, folks that need to get their anhydrous ammonia on. That's obviously top of mind. One of my big bugaboos is being fit for application of nitrogen. I know that there's a lot of folks that feel like you can run that when it's a little bit heavier. I tend to disagree with that stance. If it's not fit to plant, it's not fit to run ammonia. That's just kind of a very direct way of saying that, but that needs to be a priority for those guys that do put on their pre-plant ammonia. I think that's important, but maybe even a bigger concern for me is, and we both mentioned it, is weed control, especially some of these winter annuals. We've got to get those under control. They've greened up in the last 10 days, 2 weeks with the moisture and the heat that we've had. And if this forecast that we've just talked about stays the way it is with above normal temperatures and above normal precip, these fields are going to get woolly in a hurry. And so that might be the most important thing at this point, Ben, is trying to get that burn down on when you get an opportunity.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that also helps you out with these narrow planting windows we're likely to see. If you can get all that green burn off, um, you may gain a day easy to thin
Yeah.
those fields back out. So I I would encourage everybody, if you haven't burnt down for whatever reason, I know there is some trepidation around doing it with just where commodity prices are. Do you really want to spend that money? But I really think I would look at that as an investment. That's probably going to pay back in bushels later, just by having a more fit field and better conditions to get in. And quite honestly, it may be the difference between that field being fit and that field still being on the heavy side, in these narrow planting windows that you're likely going to be dealing with. You mentioned, and again, that warmer than average and wetter than average seems to be the pattern we're going to be in, at least for a little bit. Obviously, we have the weeds that are just taking off, but bugs are growing too.
Yep, for
Right?
sure.
I spent a little bit of time in the woods yesterday afternoon with my kids doing spring activities. Although none of us are very good at finding mushrooms down here, but
Yep.
but we did find a mountain of ticks and spiders. So,
Okay. Yeah.
that wasn't the case. That wasn't the case 2 weeks ago, but certainly was the case
Yeah.
this weekend. And that same progress follows for field pest as well. So, if from an insect perspective, Brian, what's on your mind?
Probably the two biggest ones for me, Ben, are black cutworm. That's
Mhm.
always the big one, especially with these winter annual fields that are big and woolly. Those black cutworm moths, if we end up with heavy flights, and to be fair, I haven't checked the monitor to see where we're at, but if we get heavy flights, they're attracted to those big woolly fields. And then, again, with having growing degree units above average, that means those black cutworm are developing faster than what you'd expect. So you've got a pretty good sized black cutworm already in a field that you're getting ready to plant into, and a big black cutworm can eat a lot of corn in a hurry. And so that's one of the concerns that I've got. And then another one that maybe is more local for me, but because of the no-till acres that we have, I'm always a little bit concerned about seed corn maggot. That's always one, as that stuff gets burnt down and it starts to rot, those seed corn maggots can become a real problem for corn and soybeans, certainly. We've tried tried to address some of that with some seed treatment. Obviously some of our traits on the black cutworm side as well will help with that. But those are the two biggest insects when I see these woolly fields that I think about. Maybe I'll add this one too. A lot of folks with purple dead nettle, and we've got a lot of it up here. Keep in mind that, purple dead nettle, that's an alternate host for soybean cyst nematode as well. And so you really want to watch out. And if you've got concerns about, soybean cyst nematode populations, controlling your dead nettle specifically, but winter annuals in general, that can go a long way to helping you kind of manage, I guess, soybean cyst nematode.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a follow up on the black cutworm piece, that our Acre Max and Power Core Enlist, we keep the Cry1F protein in there that picks up black cutworm for us. And last year we did see a difference in some split planter fields down here between it and the VT Double Pro, where we were picking up some black cutworm control. Black cutworm is always one of those things that, in some years we see heavy moth flights and not really much feeding, and in other years we don't see heavy moth flights, but we'll have some pockets of really heavy feeding, and it's really tempting to kind of forget about it as a pest, because we'll go 5 years without seeing it at all in some areas. So, we had a few small pockets last year, and it wouldn't surprise me if we have a few small pockets again this year. Some of the pests though that we deal with maybe more frequently, like I'm thinking like wireworms, especially in some of my coarser soils, or slugs.
Yep.
And I've got a lot of cover crop ground, or we have a lot of no-till ground, and there's a lot of years where we will fight both of those pretty heavily. Now with wireworms, our seed treatment and corn does a pretty good job of picking them up. Slugs, unfortunately, are a little bit tougher to manage, without doing anything culturally. But I will say that the heat that we have in the forecast should help with both of those as well. So, Mother Nature might give us a little bit of help on that front. But yeah, overall, though, Brian, I mean, it's not late. We mentioned that. I get we're starting to feel that, but what they say, late Easter is late spring. So
yeah, yep.
We're kind of proving that true. So I mean, overall, I think my overall theme as we're looking at getting back into the field is, let's exercise some caution on putting iron through the ground and make sure that it's truly fit. And I would go back, think about it from this standpoint. Last fall, we had a really good fall for field work. Right? Yeah. And I feel like we corrected some of the issues we've been fighting really since the fall of 2018 in some places. And it would really be a shame here 6 years later to, once we finally got those corrected, to go back and put them back in the exact same spots.
Yes.
So let's exercise some caution. So it's not always just an issue about this year's crop. It's an issue about all the rest of them.
Yep.
If we do something really silly, but then make sure we're prioritizing the time right, or prioritizing what we're doing. I agree. We've mentioned it several times. If you have these green fields, it's absolutely critical to get that taken care of as soon as you get a chance. And on a positive note, that is something, unlike anhydrous, as you mentioned, that is something we can put floats on, and we can get on those fields earlier than what we'd be able to get iron through them. So I think that kind of summarizes where I'm at. Brian, do you have anything else to add?
Not really. I think really my theme for the day and for the week, as I, talk to my customers and talk to Pioneer sales reps that I interact with on a regular basis, is just that. We just need to be patient. We're going to dry out. The equipment's large enough. Guys are willing to work hard enough that we can get this stuff in the ground in a timely manner. You referenced 2018, 2019. There is no reason at this point to get in a hurry. I'm not going to use the P word yet, but to get in a hurry, we'll get it in. And again, to your point about where we're at from an economy standpoint in ag, let's be mindful and do it one time and do it incredibly well, so that we don't have to circle back around. And so that'll be my message for the week, I think, as I visit with folks, Ben.
Yep, absolutely. I do have one question. I have a date in my mind with beans specifically. Corn, I feel like planting date's pretty pretty ambiguous. It really depends on the weather after it. But on
Yeah.
beans, can start to feel pretty late. I have a calendar date in my mind where I cut off and say, all right, we're no longer planting early beans, we're planting timely beans. Do you have a
Hmm.
date in your mind where that would be up there?
I don't probably, to be fair, Ben, we've had such good luck with some early planted early season stuff and some
Yeah.
late planted late season beans before that I don't know that I have a date just on the calendar. I probably look at that more around where we're at soil condition wise and then what that forecast looks like. So I don't know that I've honestly got a date that I would lay out there, at least not at the moment. I'm curious, what is your date and what's your kind of talking points for that?
Yeah. So if you put a bunch of years together, there is a real strong trend for planting date on beans. But if I look at it on when I can get most of our maturities to start to flower before the summer solstice, as
Sure.
I've kind of tracked this over years, it seems to be as long as we're in the ground on or before May 10th is
Okay.
when the cutoff seems to be. Now, to your point, we have shifted in my geography much heavier to earlier season beans. We used to have a small pile of group 4 beans
Yep.
down here. Most of those are gone, and a lot of that's shifted to mid group 2s or even
Okay.
some a little bit earlier. So
Yep.
so that may shift it a little bit, but yeah, it does seem May 10th seems to be the cutoff for getting beans to start flowering, our maturities rather, to flower before the summer solstice. So
Sure.
in my mind, if they're flowering before then,
Yeah.
those are early beans, right? So that's
Yeah.
that's the
Okay.
that's the date that I have in my mind, and it's not a hard cutoff. Throughout the
Yeah.
month of May, we still have that happen. But that's
Yep.
that's I was going through some notes from last year, and it got me curious. I had to go back
Okay.
and review notes for several years. That seems to be the line from the flowering standpoint, and anecdotally, just from what I've
Yeah.
observed in the field. But
Sure.
yeah,
And
for what that's worth, we're still
that's
plenty
a
early.
yeah, plenty early. And that's a pretty good date, I would say, Ben. The one thing I would add, and this, our researchers do a really nice job over the last several years of as they have bred soybeans, they've tried to breed a longer flowering period in there. But to your point, getting them started is really the key to that, trying to get them flowering before that solstice, in mid-June. And so that makes some sense to me, as I kind of just sit here and think about it as you're sharing a little bit. But I've never really had that kind of hard date, but it certainly makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So plenty of time left, and that's not to say that beans after May 10th are late. I think that we moved
Yeah.
from early to timely, right?
Okay.
At
Fair
that
enough.
point.
Yeah.
So,
Yep. All right.
yeah.
Good deal. Well, we've probably covered everything that we've got right now. Maybe we're in a bit of a holding pattern with planting progress and with the podcast for another week. So, Ben, I guess if somebody heard something or wants to talk to you or follow along with the things that you're telling your growers, how could they do that?
Yep, you can find me on X at the Ben Jacob or on Facebook at Ben Jacob Agronomy. How about you, Brian?
Yep, you can find me on Instagram, B_K_Schrader. And we will probably circle back around here in another couple weeks, give you an update from across Indiana and other parts of the Corn Belt. So with that, we appreciate you listening. Give us a thumbs up or a review on your podcast provider of choice. That always helps us know whether we're doing the right thing or we're talking about the right things. And so with that, we'll call it an episode. Appreciate you listening, and we look forward to seeing you in a couple weeks.
Thank you for listening to this episode from the Pioneer Agronomy team. Be sure to visit pioneer.com/podcasts to access additional episodes and learn more about our extensive on-farm data and innovative digital tools that are fueling forward-thinking farming.